record this week. The third week, I'm finally maybe together, sort of. Here's what I would like you to do. The papers that I asked you to write this week about Columba, would you pass them? So you guys, would you just pass them to Juliana and Clara? Why don't you hold on until you get the whole pile? And then Caleb, you hold on until you get all the way from Jonathan, and then I will take them from you. Oh, please make sure your name is on it before you pass it in. And make sure that you have marked your parallelism with a P in the margin. Yes. And if you haven't, please take a pencil and do it. Yes. What? Yeah. Hey guys, can we now just stop chatting? There'll be time to chat. We're going to have conversation later, but just so I can hear people's questions. Yes. It doesn't have to be in a row, but usually it is close together, like in the same sentence. In the same sentence. Yes, Jonathan. Oh, yes. Go get whatever you need. So if your name is on it and you have marked your parallelism with a P in the margin, go ahead and pass it over. Public school is good for two things. It teaches you to put your name on things and to pass things up. And it's just, it's fun. Like, what? We're doing what? It's fun. That's all I really learned, to pass things and put my name on papers, neither of which is an important skill. Okay, I guess we're waiting on Jonathan, so I will grab these. And then I'm going to give you your papers. When I get all of these, I'm going to give you your papers back. That way we don't confuse the two piles. Oh, excuse me. All right, while we wait for Jonathan, I'm going to scrutinize your names. Caleb and Zachary. And Hans. I got Hans and Jonathan right. Jaden. Okay, just go ahead and pass it this way. All right, awesome. Thank you. Okay, I have papers back for you. So I try to write each time we do a paper. If I notice you did something just super great, I loved it, I try to comment on it. And sometimes I correct things. And so for example, if your spelling isn't the best, if that's something you're working on, be cool about that. I will correct your spelling, but just keep working on it. Just keep reading. If you read a lot, it helps your spelling. But here's what I've learned. Some people just aren't great spellers. I am a good speller. And I thought everybody was. And then I had kids and I said, well, can't you see the word? Can't you just see it in your brain and read the words off the page in your brain? I don't know what you're talking about. And I realized not everybody sees the word in their brain and just conjures up a word, and now I can just read the word off the page in my brain. If that is you, if you're not like that, just keep working on it. But I will tell you to console you that it's been less than 200 years that there has been standardized spelling. In other words, one way to spell a word. If you read the journals of Lewis and Clark, they spell things just however they want. And President Andrew Jackson famously said, it's a poor mind that can think of only one way to spell a word. So keep working on it, because the world judges us. You know, if we misspell things, people think you're not as smart, even though it has nothing to do with smartness. It's a practice thing. But so don't take it ill. If I correct your spelling, keep working on it. If you know that you have a trouble word for you, beautiful is often a trouble word because it has all those crazy vowels. EAU, what's that about? How can it have 3 vowels in a row? Keep practicing, but don't let it get you down. Don't let it stop you from writing. Yeah, or yeah, you know, the different ways we pronounce OUGH, cough, through, rough. There's off, uff, and oo right there with the same letters. It's very difficult. So don't worry about that. One thing that some of you did, here, I'm going to close this. One thing that some of you did that I didn't mention last week, which is awesome, is you gave very specific examples. Instead of saying, he was just in an area or it was snowy, like you described the cold. Whenever we get really specific in stories, it makes it come alive. You really can picture it. And so my favorite example I give of this, it's not a very nice song, but there's a song by a country singer named Carrie Underwood, and she describes wrecking her boyfriend's car, which you should never, ever destroy other people's property.
Yes.
Okay, but she hits it with a baseball bat, and she like cuts into the seats, the nice leather seats of his car. Okay, but she doesn't say that because that would be boring. She says, "I took a Louisville Slugger to both headlights." A Louisville Slugger is a kind of bat. It doesn't just say she hit the car, to both headlights. It's very specific. And then she says she carved her name into his leather seats, and instead of saying, "I made gashes on the seats of his car." Don't ever, ever, ever do this to your own or anyone's property. But my point is that it's very specific. And I don't love this song, but I love hearing the chorus because I just think, oh, man, what specific writing. I love how it makes a real picture in my mind. So whenever you can do that, instead of saying he was wearing a coat, tell me about the coat. What color is the coat? What's it made out of? Does it feel rough against his skin? Is it heavy? Does it weigh him down? If you're specific, it makes a great impression when you write a story. Does that make sense to everybody? It really helps. The one thing that a lot of you did, and I wrote it on your paper, a lot of you started telling the story in the past tense. So your verbs were like saw, went, came, yelled, and then suddenly they turned into present tense. Sees, comes, yells. Sometimes when we tell a story, not real often in English, but sometimes we just use the present tense the whole time. It's called the historical present. And that's fine. Sometimes we just tell it all in the past because, this story that we wrote about happened 1600 years ago, so that was a long time ago. But it's good to choose one or the other. Don't start in one tense and then suddenly switch to the other tense. Does that make sense to everybody too? I pointed it out in your papers where you did it. So just, and obviously you just gave me a paper. You didn't hear what I just told you before you wrote the paper you just gave me. It's okay. But we'll just work on that for the future. Let me go ahead and give these back. And the rule here is, if I write anything on your paper, like correct something, and you don't know why, please ask me. Please ask. If I change a comma, okay, I've got a lot of no names. I have to start putting these up for sale.
I know they're so good.
Why am I not finding Nathan? Oh, where's your sign? Oh, okay. That's okay. And Owen and Juliana. Okay, so here we go with the no names. We have a largish font. We have a paper that is stapled together. It's all right. Okay, if you haven't got a paper yet, we have one typed, one handwritten. And anybody? All right, awesome. I love it when sometimes, I don't know, that might be mine. What? Although sometimes I write things and I look at it later and think, I don't know if I read that. Did I write anything on your paper that you don't understand? Did I change a comma? Somebody, I don't remember, I promise you, I don't remember who it was, did a comma splice. That is when you put two sentences together with only a comma. For example, it was a nice sunny day, comma, I went for a walk. There should be a semicolon or a comma and so, a comma and. And whoever did that, I don't remember who it was. I explained that and I gave you an example in your paper, but I think it was only one person. So are we good? Everybody's okay? All right. We are going to start out like we did last week with some writing. Is this assignment, this type of assignment, getting fairly easy for you? It's pretty easy. Do you think you could make most of an outline by yourself? Okay. I'm going to ask you to do most of the outline by yourself. We're going to do a first paragraph together, then the other two are just up to you. And part of the reason for that is that the story we're going to read is kind of multiple stories rolled into one. So you might want to choose one of the stories to do. Let's read it together. Open up your reading guide to page 8. Have you guys ever heard of St. Brendan the Navigator? Oh, he's cool. I only learned about him about 10 years ago. He just went sailing. He was an Irishman that just went sailing all over the Northwest, across the Atlantic, maybe to America, even before the Vikings. We don't know how far this guy went, but he wrote a journal of his travels, and some of them are really very strange. And one of them ought to sound slightly familiar because it sounds very much like something that happened to Sinbad in one of your Arabian Nights stories. So let's read the story of St. Brendan's voyage together. Many people think that St. Brendan, an Irish monk, discovered America nearly 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus. The story of St. Brendan's travels is full of strange adventures. Brendan lived from the year 489 to about 580. One day, a friend told him about the promised land of the saints. On this island, day never ends. The rocks are jewels. Every tree had fruit which was good to eat. Every plant had flowers with wonderful smells. The air was always warm. St. Brendan set out to find this wonderful island. First, he and some of his monks built a boat. It had a wooden frame covered with cowhides. The outside was smeared with grease to make it waterproof. It had one sail. St. Brendan blessed the boat and had it filled with supplies. Then he set off to the west with a few monks. After many days, the men spotted an island. A dog led the monks to a large house filled with marvelous furnishings. There was bread, fish, and water for each of the visitors. Then they slept in comfortable beds. For 3 days, the sailors ate and rested. Except for the dog, no other living creature was seen on the entire island. Then they set sail again. Okay, that's a little, I'm just going to stop. That's a little odd. An island with a dog that serves you, but then they set sail again. On another island, the monks met a man who gave them many supplies. He told them that they would sail for 7 years before returning to Ireland. Not long after leaving that island, St. Brendan and his monks stepped onto a stony beach. They collected a small pile of driftwood and began to cook lunch. But as the fire burned hotter, the earth began to move. What could be happening? The monks shook in fear. The land began to shake and sink into the water. Racing for the boat, the monks paddled away as fast as they could. When they looked back, they saw that the island was really a giant fish. Many months later, St. Brendan told the monks that Easter was near. They searched for land so that they could celebrate the Easter holy day. At last, they reached an island. It was full of trees, grass, and flowers. The trees were so covered with snow-white birds that the leaves could not be seen. The birds sang so sweetly that St. Brendan called them his Easter choir. Easter was a cheerful day as the monks and birds sang together. Far away from land, the monks saw a huge beast swimming towards them. The beast's mouth was wide open, as if it would eat the monks in the boat. It swam so fast that it made waves as high as a wall. The huge waves almost swamped the boat. The beast came nearer. The monks held onto the sides of the boat. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, another monster attacked the beast. The beast was killed and the monks were safe. Sailing on, St. Brendan and his friends saw many strange sights. They found a land with many erupting volcanoes. So many fiery rocks were being blown from the volcanoes that it seemed as if demons were throwing flaming stones at the monks. Oh, do you guys know of there's an island in the North Atlantic with lots of volcanoes? Do you know which island I'm thinking of? Recently, I think they were up Iceland. Iceland has volcanoes.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
Not long ago, I think Iceland was erupting again. Iceland has, so I wonder if they were near Iceland at this point.
Well, Iceland is not in the Pacific.
What?
Iceland's not in.
Oh, did I say I meant Atlantic? If I said Pacific, I meant Atlantic. The monks saw places where sheep were as big as cows. Another place had grapes as big as apples. St. Brendan and his crew visited many places before they found the promised land. The land was so big they could not explore all of it. They found fruit and jewels, some of which they took back to Ireland. Some of Brendan's adventures sound imaginary, but scientists have found some very old Irish items in different parts of North America. Perhaps St. Brendan found America first. This is the weird story of St. Brendan the Navigator. Flip your page, and on page 10, you ought to have just an empty spot. Let's use our empty spot. We're just going to do the first paragraph, and then I'm going to just let you guys run with it this week. But your outline, we're going to fill in the first part, so you can copy that down. And then I will leave you to do the other two parts on your own. I'll just make them small down here. You know the drill. So at least copy down the first paragraph for me.
Question.
Yes.
Why are we not using the thing that we used for the first week?
Because it's already got words on it.
Well, yeah, but what
Because I felt like you could do that work instead of me copying it in for you, and to get used to doing it for yourself. It's a good question. Who is in this story? St. Brendan and his monks.
So, Ken, is this going to be like the last lesson?
It is. Oh, what did you say about bending the truth?
Where you can like kind of bend the truth.
Well,
like not too
yeah, not too much. So we're going to, instead of bending the truth, let's call it embellishing. If we want to embellish details that we don't know, but let's not have Brendan fly on an airplane from island to island, because that would be weird in 480 AD. But yes, embellishing. Remember what I said about being specific? And when they don't tell us anything specific, like, for example, when the big fish or whale or whatever it was that they got out and they built a fire on it, it doesn't really tell us what the weather was like, how it felt, how did the ground feel. Imagine what it would be like to sit on the back of a whale.
I would think it'd be like something. I don't know.
I feel like it would be smelly. It's just, well, whales aren't really blue.
But like still, without any wildlife or anything.
See here.
It's a turtle with stuff running on its back.
Here's the thing, Jonathan. Sometimes when we read stories, and the Arabian Nights are a really good example of this, but fairy tales, and that's what Arabian Nights are, really. They're Arabian fairy tales. Sometimes we have to pretend we live in that world and not get hung up on whether or not it could be real. So when I hear the story of Cinderella, it really ruins the story if I start analyzing, well, what did the fairy godmother look like? Well, how, did she appear all at once? Did she appear little by little? If I start analyzing it like it's in a laboratory and it's a science experiment. And so when they say, okay, they got out and they got on the back of a whale. All right, I'm just gonna accept that. I'm just going to accept that under whatever circumstances, maybe they were so desperate to get out of the boat, they just wanted to find somewhere to get out. Do you know what I mean? And maybe they overlooked. Sometimes we want to do something so bad that we kind of overlook the problems with it. Do you know what I mean? I want to eat desserts all the time so bad. I'm just going to overlook the fact that it's really bad for me and it will make me sick eventually. I don't want to think about that. I just want to think about this. So maybe they thought, it's land. Are there any trees on it? No. Is it kind of rubbery? Is there dirt? No. Yeah, but we could get out of the boat and we're happy. Does that make sense? So we'll just kind of pretend. It's called the willing suspension of disbelief. We just pretend.
Irish stuff on the thing. How is there such thing as sea beast or whatever stuff?
Well, here's the thing, Jonathan. All the time, scientists are finding new creatures that live down in the depths of the ocean that they didn't even know about. Huge, not octopus, but I'm thinking like squid, huge, that sort of creature. They're bigger than we ever knew. So I'm open to sea monsters, very open to sea monsters myself. Yeah, Oren.
The whale wasn't a whale.
Didn't say it was a whale. So it was a great fish. So we don't know. So Saint Brendan and his monks are in this story. Yes,
What if it was a
Jaden.
megalodon that killed the
That would be awesome. That would be like a Jurassic Park movie.
Can I make the big fish eternal because it makes no sense?
You know what? I will let you make the creature be any sort of creature that plausibly might be living in the sea.
Cool. So it's a giant turtle.
Okay, but come back with me. Well, I'm glad we got so into the giant animal. That's amazing. I want to spend the whole hour talking about the animal, but so where do Brendan and his monks live?
On a boat.
Well, where did they live before they got on the boat?
Ireland?
They lived in Ireland. And when did they live? This, yes.
or Christopher Columbus.
Okay.
89 to 580.
So you know what? These are all good choices. I'm going to put several of these here. 489 to 580. And I'm going to put, I mean, it's painfully obvious that's before Columbus. The point is they went exploring a long way. Before Columbus, before the Vikings, who are also famous for exploring in that direction. You can choose one of these. And why in the world do they get it in their heads to go sea traveling? The promised land. What's it like there? What?
It rules like stones. It's got
Okay, go ahead.
fruit and jewels for rocks. It's like heaven.
It's like heaven. So they heard about a promised land. Can you guys see well enough in the back? Do I write largely enough for you? Okay. Do we want to put some details about the promised land? Do we want to say, just say it has jewels, fruit, and it's like heaven. So what do they do about it? They build a boat. It does sound like Sinbad, doesn't it? I want to talk. And then Sinbad sounds like another famous story. I think maybe all these people read the same stories. They build a boat, and what do? In one word. We got one word left. They cruise. Oh, that's very specific. Okay. And they, you choose one. They voyaged. They cruised. I love these verbs. Or they just sailed. That's a little boring. That's a little boring. You can choose one. They odysseyed. This is the other story I'm thinking of. They did. So the story tells you a lot of things that happened. This story doesn't really have a What is the problem? What is the solution? So much. I guess the solution is they made it home eventually. It says they did. Does it say they did? Well, no, it doesn't say they did, but somebody wrote it down. I will tell you they made it home and wrote it down. But here's your choices. Okay, listen to this, because these are your choices. You can mention many of their adventures, or you can choose one. For example, you could tell and embellish the whole story of the island where only a dog was there. And you can, what was it like? What did they eat? All right. Well, we can keep it, Asher, keep it. Don't let anybody else have your ideas. Keep them. You could tell the story of the big sea creature, which is exciting. You could tell the story of sailing by the island with volcanoes and rocks are spewing out and crashing in the sea next to the boat. You could pick one of those, or you can just say, I like them all. So I'm just going to mention a bunch of the places, and then eventually they found the promised land and they got home. Do those instructions make sense to everybody? Do you feel like you could do that? Jonathan, say again. Start with what? You could. You could just say after many adventures, they found the promised land, and then you could make the whole story about the promised land. Do you see the options that you have? So this way, every paper I read is going to be a little different this time because you're going to choose different things. But here's something that's going to be the same in all of them. I want you to do the parallelism again. Somewhere in your paper, I need 3 words of the same parts of speech in the same sentence. So, you know, they built a boat, and I don't think we'd use all of these. And they voyaged fearfully, hopefully, and triumphantly, because they found the promised land. And then you'd have 3 adverbs. Or when the fish, or fish or turtle, the sea creature. The sea creature was, when he feels a fire being built on his back, which would be annoying. Somebody built a fire on your back. The sea creature was outraged, furious, and violent. Aggressive, irritated. We could describe the sea creature in a lot of ways. Yes.
So did he actually make it to the promised land?
Well, according to the story. And they says that he brought things back. I have read the stories that this is taken from a longer work, The Voyages of St. Brendan, and I've read part of it. It's very odd. I don't know what else to say. But apparently they had proof that they went somewhere and found something. They kept circling back to the island where they had Easter. They kept circling back and having Easter there every year. Just conveniently, they found the island every year so they could celebrate Easter with the guy there. It's St. Brendan. So did you notice the dates? This is the same time. This is a little after St. Patrick. Not very much after St. Patrick. Again, Ireland is just packed full of adventurers and scholars. They are spreading the gospel through Europe, through Scandinavia. They're setting up monasteries everywhere. They're the beacon of civilization for a couple of 100 years. But unfortunately, something happens to them to kind of snuff that out. And that would be the Vikings. That would be the Norsemen. We'll read about that in a few weeks. But okay, so the first thing you're going to do for me this week is retell the story of St. Brendan. You're going to choose one of his adventures, or you know what, if it's just too hard to choose, you include them all. And somewhere you're going to put parallelism in your paper, and you're going to mark it for me. Does anybody have a question about that at all? Any question? Just the one. I think next week we're adding a second thing. I feel like one every single week doesn't give you enough practice. Some people don't have it, and then they get behind and they can't keep up. Yeah.
At the end of the year, you're like, you have like an entire checklist.
Yes, I don't love that, so I don't do it that way. Okay, go ahead and get your reading questions. Just flip back to page 5. Just flip back a couple of pages. This week you read about the Arabs. Does anybody know who the ancestor of the Arab peoples is? Who do they look back to as their first ancestor? Oh, not that far back, but no, it would be Shem for them too, but a little not quite as far back. Does anybody know where do the Arabs come from? Where did the Jews come from? Who is the ancestor of the Jewish people? Who before Moses? Because there were a bunch of Hebrews. Abraham. Abraham's son Isaac. You remember this story? Had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. You remember? Did Abraham have any other children? Ishmael. Isaac had an older brother, Ishmael. Do you remember that God promised Abraham, I am going to make you a great nation. But God didn't do it right away. I mean, he waited a long, long time. And Abraham was getting old, and his wife Sarah was getting old. It's like, and women don't really have babies when they get older. They do this when they're younger. I'm like, well, what's the deal? And Sarah said, finally, look, you're going to have a child that's God's going to turn into a great nation, but apparently not with me. So you need another wife. You need to marry another woman, and maybe she will give you a son. And he did. Does anybody remember her name? Abraham's it was one of Sarah's servants, Hagar. It was Hagar. And she had a son, Ishmael. And then Ishmael was the only son for a long time. And then finally, it was time for Isaac. God knew it was time for Isaac. And Ishmael was maybe 12, 13 years old. And they were having a birthday party for Isaac, little Isaac. And Ishmael was just annoyed. A stupid little kid. I was the only son for a long time. And he made snide remarks, apparently, about Isaac. And Sarah heard it and said to Abraham, I want you to get rid of her and the kid. Just tell them to go. Hagar and Ishmael, tell them to go. And they did. And Scripture tells us that they went out and they didn't know where to find water. They were out in the desert. They didn't know where there was a spring of water. And she laid Ishmael down under a tree to just die, basically, because she thought they were going to die. And an angel came to them and said, what are you doing? What's the problem? You know what, Hagar? Because Ishmael is Abraham's son, I will turn him into a great group of nations too. Just because he's Abraham's son. Don't worry. And then showed her where there was water. These are the Arab people. So I don't know if you know this, but for generations, the Arab peoples and the Jewish people have not gotten along very well. It's kind of putting it mildly. They still do not get along very well in Israel today. And it's really sad because they're half brothers, Ishmael and Isaac. But it also explains something. The Arab people knew through passing down stories and also through living near the Jewish people, they knew about their forefather Abraham. They knew stories about him. They knew some of the stories of the Old Testament, but they weren't really worshiping the one God anymore. They had become pagans. And those are the people living in, all right, I'm going to show you this map for other reasons in a minute. But can you guys in the back, can you sort of see that this is the Mediterranean? Okay, and there's a peninsula here that's kind of shaped like a triangle. The desert, the Arabian desert. This is where this group of people are living, and they're traders. They're going back and forth, merchants, buying merchandise in one place and selling it another, like we see in Arabian Nights, don't we? Did you notice how many people are merchants? They're traveling around. They buy something cheap, and then they go somewhere else where they don't have that thing, and then they sell it for a lot of money and they make money. That's what they did. The first question I asked you is, what does it mean to be a nomad? It said, Dorothy Mills says most of the Arab people were nomads. What's a nomad? Oh, very first, second sentence on page 63. What Jonathan, what is a nomad?
They kind of wander around the place and don't they raid places?
Yeah, they might raid places. They might just be merchants and not stealing things, but they do tend to argue with each other. They just roam around. They don't really have a city or a home. Say again.
I said they're always on the move.
They're always on the move. And so this was their lifestyle. Sometimes they would have herds that they would herd around, but small, because there's no water. You have to know where the next water is, right? Because most of that area is desert. It's a rough life. Can you imagine living in tents in the desert for your whole life, but not in the tent in the same place all the time? You just, every once in a while, you move the tent to a new place. Would you like that? Some people have motorhomes. Do you know, like campers? And they just sell their house and they drive around. Do you think you'd get tired of it eventually? No, it would be nicer in a camper, definitely, than on a camel in the sand. I feel like maybe I would get tired of that. But what if that's the only thing you had ever known? You didn't know what it was like to build a house and live in a city and live there always. I'm curious, how many of you have always lived in the Quad Cities? So most of you, at least half of you. It would be weird to just change your residence all the time, but that's what the Arab people did. But there is one place that they all visited, and that was their sacred city, which is Mecca. Mecca, right here on the Arabian desert. For some reason, I didn't put this map in your reading guide. I don't know what I was thinking. And they'd go there every year. Why? Or you can go ahead and say what you were going to say.
I accidentally answered all the questions for next week.
Oh, you know what? So life is just really easy for you next week, isn't it? You know what? It's fine. It's fine. What was in Mecca that made them all want to go, Nathan?
Kaaba, big black stone that fell from heaven.
A big black stone that fell from heaven. And they had a little building built around it. Yeah, maybe a meteor. Those are big stones that fall from heaven, honestly. Most of them burn out, but sometimes we find chunks. Sometimes there are chunks. Well, we don't know what it was, because people who are not of their religion aren't allowed to go and see. There are rules about that. But they would go every year and they would worship this stone. They would make a pilgrimage to this shrine that had this big black stone, and the shrine was called the Kaaba. And so fine, life is going on for centuries for the Arabs. They're wandering around. They're either raiding or trading, maybe a little bit of both. And every year they're meeting up. They're going to worship in Mecca at the Kaaba. Then suddenly something changed. A man named Muhammad was born in the late 500s. Oh, I took away our dates for St. Brendan. When did it say St. Brendan? 580. Okay. So when St. Brendan is dying, this guy named Muhammad is being born roughly at the same time. And he was just an Arab trader like everyone else. He had his own little business, and a widow, an older widow, hired him to lead her caravans through the desert and sell merchandise. And he got along with her so well, he ended up marrying her. And they had a nice little trading business. And suddenly something happened to Muhammad. And this was the next question I asked you. What led Muhammad to begin teaching a new religion? What happened to Muhammad? I'm going to give it to Hans. It says Gabriel. Usually they say Gabriel. That's okay.
So Gabriel appeared, and then so he asked Muhammad to proclaim God to the people, and that he was kind of like God's prophet.
Yes. Do you remember, did this just happen once, this visit, or did it happen a lot of times? I'm not even sure if Dorothy Mills told you. Because that's not a very fair question if she didn't tell you. Yeah, I don't think it really says. It over a period of time, he says that Gabriel visited him. So here's what Muhammad would do. He was pagan, but he knew about the Jewish God. Remember, because they're sort of diverging from the same line from Abraham, and also they live really, really close to the Israelites, right? They're southern neighbors, and they go through trading caravans, travel along the coast, and they read and they hear things. So he knew something about that, and he would go out into a cave or a place quiet by himself to pray and meditate on God as he understood God, or how he should live. And then he started coming back from his little prayer visits and saying, an angel is telling me the rules we should follow and all about God, and has chosen me to be his prophet. Yeah. Or there, no. AD, yes. Our whole year this year is going to be AD, so we can keep it straight. Last year was kind of weird because we had an overlap. So did everybody love this new religion that Muhammad brought back immediately? Oh, how did they treat him? What did he have to do? Oh, actually, the next question. What happened in 622? Okay, you want to add to that, Jaden?
Muhammad went to
Medina.
And fought for 8 years against them.
Yeah, he ran away because they wanted to kill him. Now, I've made a slight mistake in your reading guides, but I'd like you to do something for me. Flip your reading guide back to page 77. You can keep the place or stick your finger in the place we are. We're going to go back to that. We have timelines in the back. This date is really important in history. So here's what I've done accidentally. I've given you a timeline that has 700 AD at the top and 1000 at the bottom. Does your paper look like that? The page you're on? Mm-hmm. And so, but unfortunately, 622 isn't between those two dates. And so what we're going to do above it is I want you to write this, 622 flight. And because this is such a famous word, we're going to put the Arabic word, hijra, the hijra of Muhammad. Can you all see that? Okay. His wife believed him, but that wasn't really enough. All the other townspeople said, no, we don't love your new religion. And we're going to persecute you because of it. So he ran away to Medina and lived there for what would you say, 8 years? Did it say 7, 8 years? Here's why that date is so important. It feels like a defeat. Doesn't that feel like a bad thing for Muhammad? Everyone hated him so much he ran away. That doesn't sound like a thing to remember. But for Muslims, this is their year 1. This is what they count time from. What do we count time from? Birth of Christ. So when it's 2023, that means 2023 years since the birth of Christ. Does anybody remember? So, Owen, I'm going to throw you under the bus. Do you remember from last year? Do you know what the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, what was their year 1? Do you remember? It's totally fine if you don't. The Olympic Games, the first Olympic Games. Does anyone know what the Romans counted their years from?
I know one of the Roman games. It was where there was a ring on the wall, and they would try to get. I think it might have been like a ball or something
Is that-
as heavy as a bowling ball.
That might be Mayans. You might be thinking of Mayans had hooks.
My mom
On the wall.
saw that.
Okay, you know what?
That was mine.
Oh, okay. Do you know what the Romans counted from? This is a pretty easy one. Okay. From the start of Rome, 753 BC. So people pick as their year 1 something important to them. Does that make sense? When we say it's 2023, we're saying Jesus is important. Jesus is very important. When the Greeks said that the first Olympic Games was year 1, it tells you that they really, really thought highly of the Olympic Games. The Romans really thought highly of themselves. They did. This is a very accurate description of the Romans. And rightly so in a lot of cases. But the followers of Muhammad's new religion thought this was very, very important. And I'm going to throw a question out now. I don't actually have an answer to it. You guys are going to help me work my way. Why choose what seems to be a bad thing for their year 1? Like, wouldn't you rather pick when he came back and he conquered them all and he took over Mecca and he founded his empire? Okay. Yeah, I like that, Warren. Something suddenly started happening. The religion started making a difference in the world. It started changing people's lives. I don't really have an answer to this, but I will throw out this. We mark the birth of Christ, but we also commemorate deeply the crucifixion, don't we? And to the world, this seems like a defeat. At Easter, we celebrate the victory. On Good Friday, we kind of commemorate what looked to the world, even the disciples, like, wow, we lost. Jesus is dead. So maybe they remember a moment when it looked like this new religion was just going to get snuffed out in the very beginning, but it didn't. I don't have an answer for that. Why they chose this event to be their year 1, but they did. And so Muhammad gathered followers in Medina. And what was it he was preaching? He was preaching there is one God, and his name is Allah. There is one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. This was their main message. They had, this is on Dorothy Mills, page 67. I didn't ask you this, but I'm going to talk about it. They're called the 5 pillars of Islam. So pillars hold something up, right? Like columns holding up the roof. And these are the things that hold up this new religion. And they are Every day you recite the creed, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. 5 times a day you pray. So followers of this religion will have a prayer rug. This is kind of insulting a little bit, like a yoga mat, just like that you could lay out. Only not as soft, I guess, but just like a portable rug, and you lay and you face towards Mecca, wherever you are in the world. You face towards Mecca, and you pray. Generally, countries that follow this religion have someone that calls you to prayer, like a horn. A horn will sound 5 times a day. It's time for everybody to pray. Fast 1 month a year. It's during the winter time. It's called Ramadan. It's a very sacred fast for them. They don't not eat anything for a month, but you only eat after sunset. You don't eat all day during Ramadan. Make a pilgrimage to Mecca sometime in your life. And the 5th one she didn't talk about: give alms, charity, giving money to the poor. These are the 5 pillars of Islam that every good follower of this religion should do. Yeah, Oren, you waited very patiently.
Why is it Allah if he was visited by Gabriel?
This is a good question.
Yeah, but also, what if you're on the exact other side of the world? Where do you point?
I don't
Do you
know.
point up? Do you point
I guess
down?
those people get to choose. You can choose any direction you want. So what is this new religion called? I've used the word several times. Islam. And what does Islam mean? Surrender, submission to Allah, complete submission. And the followers of Islam are called Muslims. And what is their sacred book? The Quran, which I have a copy of. And it's very odd. It tells a lot of stories from the Old Testament, but they're sort of botched. And they seem to have trouble distinguishing between Miriam, Moses' sister, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, because both those words, it's Mary, Miriam and Mary, it's the same name, just in different languages. They're both named Mary. And so sometimes he's talking about Moses, and then suddenly he's talking about Mary in Bethlehem, as if they're not quite sure which is which. This was not written down by Muhammad. This was not even written down in Muhammad's lifetime. The stories got passed down, and eventually they said we should write down the sacred things that Gabriel told Muhammad. And later it was compiled into a book. And I marked a couple of spots just so you could, just to show you a few things, give you an idea. Okay, so it says, tell of Moses, who said to his people, why do you seek to harm me, my people, when you know that I am sent to you by Allah? And when they went astray, Allah led their very hearts astray. He does not guide the evildoers. And of Jesus, who said to the Israelites, I am sent forth to you by Allah to confirm the Torah already revealed and to give you news of an apostle that will come after me, whose name is Ahmed or Muhammad. According to the Quran, Jesus' message was, I am a prophet and another prophet will come after me. Is that the message that we read in the Gospels? That's not the message. Jesus said things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I don't think he ever said, oh, just wait for the prophet that's going to come after me. When they asked, are you the one we've been waiting for, or should we expect someone else? Like, there will be no one else. Okay, in another place it says, Jesus was no more than a mortal whom we favored. We meaning Allah is talking. Whom we favored and made an example to the Israelites. Had it been our will, we could have replaced you with angels to succeed you on the earth. He is a portent of the hour of doom. Have no doubt about its coming and follow me. This is the right path. Let Satan not mislead you, for he is your sworn enemy. And when Jesus worked his miracles, he said, I have come to give you wisdom and to make plain to you some of the things about which you differ. Fear Allah and follow me. Allah is my Lord and your Lord. Therefore, serve him. This is the right path. So Muslims honor Jesus as a prophet. For them, he's like Moses. He's one of the great prophets. But I'm going to ask you guys a question. Can a great prophet save you? Who only can save you? Only God can save you. If Jesus is only a prophet, we're in big trouble. Does that make sense to everybody? If Jesus isn't God, we're wasting our time. But they don't believe that Jesus is God, but they do believe he was a prophet. They think that Jesus came and people mistook what he wanted to do. So I'm going to read something else out of there in a minute. But so the Arabs, Muhammad went back to Mecca and conquered. And this religion of Islam started spreading. And it spread. Okay, I will read this now. Here's the reason. Let me read a couple of quotes. Proclaim a woeful punishment to the unbelievers. Except those idolaters who have honored their treaties with you and have aided none against you. With those keep faith until their treaties have run their term. Allah loves the righteous. When the sacred months are over, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Arrest them, besiege them, and lie in ambush everywhere for them. If they repent and take to prayer and pay the alms tax, let them go their way. Allah is forgiving and merciful. Right there, it says, go conquer people who are not followers of Islam. But if they submit to you, if they say, we're sorry we fought, you're like, okay, here's the deal. You can live here and be a Christian or a Jew. You can live here, but you're going to pay heavy taxes to the government now. And as long as you do that, you're okay. They didn't kill everyone in the areas they took over, but they made you pay. They made you pay a lot if you weren't a Muslim. Here in another place, fight against such of those to whom the scriptures were given as believe neither in Allah nor the last day, who do not forbid what Allah and his apostles have forbidden, and do not embrace the true faith until they pay tribute out of hand and are utterly subdued. The Jews say Ezra is the son of Allah, while the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah. Such are their assertions, in which they imitate the infidels of old. Allah confound them, how perverse they are. So, with instructions like that, the followers of Muhammad started obeying those instructions. And Muhammad only lived another 10 years after the Hijra, after the flight. He died in 632. But I'm going to come, I hope, you guys are so far away. This seems so long. So, okay, here's my map again. We've been looking at the Mediterranean. Okay, this isn't going to be on the camera, but I don't care. So does everybody see the color that's like this, the lightest gray? Okay, so do you see that there are 3 shades of gray darker than that? All right, the darkest shade was taken over before Muhammad died in 10 years. In 10 years, everything that's the darkest, they were all Muslims. I know that was fast. In 40 years, they had taken everything that was the next color. So all of this kind of darker gray, in 40 years. Exactly. This is why this map is so amazing. And in 120, 130 years, everything on this map that has that darker shade. Everything on this map that's not this light color that the Sahara is in 120 years. People just fell before them. And all these people, they didn't kill them all. There were Christians living here. But they said, if you're going to live in our lands, you're going to have to pay super heavy taxes. This shook up the world. I can't even tell you how much this shook up the world. Because first of all, Egypt, when they took Egypt, Egypt was the place where much of the food that was shipped all over the Mediterranean was grown. The Muslims took over the food supply. This hurt everyone in the Mediterranean because this was feeding a lot of people. Yeah, Zachary, what were you going to say?
I noticed in the Arabian Nights, in the book, when in the story of the little hunchback, and the Christian merchant was there, and they said, "Oh, he's murdered a follower of Allah." Like it was a bigger deal to the Christian than
It was very good, very good. In that really weird story about the little hunchback that choked on a fishbone, and they kept hiding his body. They kept passing his body to someone else. Yeah, when they thought a Christian had done it, it was a big deal. A Christian has killed a Muslim. So they took over Egypt. They took over trade. So before Islam, there were still ships traveling back and forth to the Persian Gulf, to the Arabian Sea. They were shipping spices, all sorts of things that they couldn't get in Europe that they got from Asia, just like they had in Roman times. There was just this lively trade going on, and then the Muslims just took over the Eastern Mediterranean. And some of them were rather piratey. There were some notorious Muslim pirates sailing along the north coast. I mean, see, they took over the whole north coast of Africa. Do you see they took over Spain? What is today Spain? Spain had they fought against the Muslims for years. We'll be talking about this throughout the fall. But they finally got rid of the Muslims. The Muslims were finally ejected from Spain in 1492, the year Columbus sailed. Everything hinges on the year Columbus sailed. They were still fighting Muslims up until then. I mean, Spain was Muslim for 800 years. They worked their way all the way into what is today France. Next week, you're going to read more about this family, but Dorothy Mills told you the story. There was a man, he wasn't the king of the Franks, but he was sort of like the prime minister. He was the mayor of the palace, they called them. His name was Charles, and he went out in 732 and met Muslim armies at a place called Tours, the Battle of Tours, and he got a nickname. He became Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. I like that. He's Charles the Hammer because pounds them. Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. You know all about that. So you're ahead of the game. And turn them back. Now, look over here. Look over here, if you can see from a distance. Here is Constantinople. They're very close, aren't they? They're inching towards Constantinople. That Byzantine Empire is now, for the rest of its life, until 1453, going to be dealing with Muslim Arab groups that basically would like to take over Constantinople because it was amazing and rich, beautiful and awesome, and they wanted it. This changed history. And it changed it. We've been talking about sort of bad things that happened, but actually there was some good that came out of it. The Arab people, okay, let's go back to this. Took over where Babylon used to be, Persia. They took over much of what had been the Roman world, and they liked to learn things. There were some groups of Muslim Arabs that really were interested in learning. Now, all these people in the East, they still knew how to read and write Greek. They were still using Greek in the churches over there. In the West, there were fewer people that could read Greek. So Plato and Aristotle and all the Greek literature that they had, they could still read it here. They couldn't over here. They didn't have very much of it translated into Latin. The Arabs conquered people that had those books, and the Arabs got busy and they translated them into Arabic. And then they proceeded travel to Spain, where they were right next to the rest of the Europeans, and they started passing on this knowledge. People that lived nearby said, "Oh, those Muslims in Spain, they've got some awesome books. We should hire some Arab teachers. We should get some translators in there and translate some of these books into Latin because we didn't even know this book existed." And they started getting copies of Greek geographers and scientists and philosophers that Europe, the West didn't know about anymore. They didn't remember, they didn't have a copy. And so I wrote down some of the things that the Arabs gave us. First of all, they invented the astrolabe. Like, what is an astrolabe? It's an instrument for navigating by using the height of the stars above the horizon so that you know what latitude you're at. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you know this? That so if you find the North Star, if you go out at night and you go towards the north and you look for the North Star, it's right about that. It's about halfway up. You know, it's not close to the horizon. It's not straight above us. It's about halfway because we're about halfway between the equator and the North Pole. But if I were at the North Pole, it would be here. And if I were at the equator, it would be there. Does that make sense to you? Sort of? Okay. So they would mark stars with the astrolabe very, very exactly. I know. Aren't we lucky? Do you know what? Do you know what? If we didn't have a marker that was roughly above the North Pole like that that all the other stars seemed to move around, navigation would have been very difficult.
Wait, so if you're in the below the equator, you can't see the North
If you're in below the equator, you can't see the North Star.
But there's a southern cross.
Yes, people in the southern hemisphere have their own constellations. I know, this is very mind-blowing. My daughter is getting ready to go to New Zealand in February to go stay in, the Shire. And anyway, and so yes, I'm kind of curious. I want to know what it's like to go out at night in New Zealand, and the skies will be completely different for her, and not to mention the season will be different. She's going in February, but it will be summer. No, I know. It's mind-blowing. But the Arabs did not do a lot of sailing in the southern hemisphere. It was mostly northern. Although when you go, I wonder where the equator is. When you go, because they were traveling around into the Indian Ocean into India. Where is the equator? Does anybody know? Like roughly here? Does the equator run through India? It did not think of me to. What is it below? Is it below India?
I think it's a tiny bit in India, like right on the Yeah, I think it's like
the equator than India.
Because that would change navigation. If they drop below the equator, this is going to change navigation. If you're mapping by the North Star, you're mapping by northern hemisphere stars. This just occurred to me. Yeah, Oren.
the Tropic of Cancer that is going through right there. So equator is
Would have to be below. Okay. You can. Okay. She's going to take a bird ID guide because she likes birds. Okay, enough about my daughter. So the Arabs perfected this tool of navigation, which meant they could take over all the trade routes. They were very daring sailors. They set up an observatory, an astronomical observatory in Baghdad, which later on, I always forget, it's in Iraq or Iran. It's in Iraq. But was a Muslim capital back then, and they set up an observatory. They're charting the planets. They're charting the stars. They started using an amazing invention that you use all the time, and you're probably not thankful enough for it. In fact, I have some of them on the board right now. How did the Romans write their numbers? Oh my gosh. Yeah. And this is 50, and this is 40. Oh my goodness. So what if I want to add, I don't know, 109 plus 40? Can I just do the thing? The thing that we do? No, I can't. It's called, this is why I don't teach math. The thing that we do, you know. What do you? It's not long addition. It's not long division. It doesn't even have a name. Adding place by place value. We can't do that. But when we have 109 and 40, we got hundreds and tens and ones. Brilliant. And the Arabs are the people who said, you know what would make this really work well? We'll just invent this thing, and it means there's just nothing there. There's just nothing there. They invented the use of the zero. And we look at they invented nothing. Yay for them. They invented zero. No, but we couldn't do this if we didn't have the ability to say there are no ones here. There are no tens here. It revolutionized mathematics. We called these Arabic numerals. Arabic numerals. Because if the Arabs used, they probably got it from India, but we call them Arabic numerals anyway. Yes. As far as I know, it was base 10. So some of you might be thinking about this or know about it. You will very shortly if you're not already. One Arab mathematician wrote a treatise, and in the title, I wrote it in here. I didn't write the whole, this is not the whole title of the treatise, but it used algebra. Algebra. Algebra means in Arabic reunion of broken parts or balancing. And if you have learned, or when you start doing algebra, you will find out algebra is all about having an equal sign in the middle and a certain quantity on this side and a certain quantity on this, and you come to a solution by adding or subtracting or multiplying or dividing by the same thing on both sides. And you work your way to the point where you have the thing you don't know on one side and the thing you do know on the other, and you've solved the equation. But it's fun. It's so fun. Satisfying to see all the little steps. And then it's done. The Arabs invented algebra. So when you start studying algebra, don't blame your mother. Don't blame Mr. Saxon. Blame the Arabs. And I already mentioned that they translated books of philosophy into Latin. Well, they brought them into the orbit of where Christian Latin speakers were, and then these works got translated into Latin. We owe them a lot for the learning that was preserved. But so they took over huge amounts of land, and they either killed people or forced them to pay high taxes to live in a Muslim country. On the other hand, they preserved much learning that we wouldn't have. Another thing I didn't mention, they were pioneers in medicine. I wrote this down. Famous Arab scholar Avicenna lived in around the year 1000. Wrote a medical encyclopedia. And listen to this. Stressed disease contagion. In other words, germs make you sick and you can spread them. I mean, you look at me like, yes, germs make you sick and you can spread them. People didn't know people didn't know in many cases at that time what exactly made you sick. If there was a plague circling, they knew that if you were around plague victims, you often got sick, but they didn't understand how this worked. Stressed contagion and stressed how it spreads through water supplies, contaminated water. Centuries before anybody in Europe was thinking about this, was, oh, we'll drink the nasty water. Actually, mostly they drank beer and wine because they knew not to drink the nasty water. But this medical text that he wrote was the text for medical schools all the way through the Middle Ages. Because they were, a book I was reading about it said they weren't real good on surgery, but they were really good on disease prevention, which even today we say, isn't it better to stay healthy than to need somebody to operate on you? You know, if you can stay healthy and not need the operation, it's better. And that's what the Arab doctors said. So we owe them so much. We also ran into them in Arabian Nights, but let me show you one more thing I brought. This is a book, I don't even know how I found it. I think it was a Goodwill. It's an Arabic book. And like, who doesn't want an Arabic book at Goodwill? So I bought it. One thing about the Muslims is they were forbidden to have art that represented creatures, human beings or animals. Now, this book actually does. And for example, and I was wondering about that, and I did some looking into it. And apparently, in some areas of the Muslim world, this restriction has been relaxed. But you don't really draw pictures of Muhammad. You don't try to represent God at all in art. But some people are still very hardcore Muslims where you don't do any sort of art that represents a creature. So what did their art look like? It ended up looking like, like the back of this book, designs. They excelled in beautiful designs. If your book looks like mine, and yours might have this too, there's a picture of the mosque in Cordova in Spain. The beautiful decorations, and it's covered in stripes. I hope I get to go there someday. It's covered, and it doesn't, this is a black and white picture. The stripes are red. It's covered in red stripes. That's it. It must be very odd to walk through. So they decorated things with designs, but they didn't do images. Remember last week we talked about in the Byzantine Empire where they had a big argument over should we use images in worship, and they resoundingly decided yes, we should, we can, and we should. But the Muslims said no, we don't do that. Yeah, Nathan. I suppose. I don't want anyone to become dehydrated. Anyway, so I'm going to leave this up here in case you're interested, but Arabic writing is very interesting. They do not use the Roman and Greek alphabet, obviously. My son minored in Arabic in college. So, I should have, except he doesn't live with me anymore. He's gone. But I should have, if he has time, to write everybody's names in Arabic for you. He did this 2 years ago for me because it was kind of cool. So this is Islam. Changed the world. The last big incursion of the Muslims into Europe was in the late 1600s, I believe. And they were fought back from Europe in a big battle on September 11th. Mm-hmm. And so, but most of you have grown up in a different world than me. When I was growing up, Islam was just sort of an odd religion that was very far away across the sea. But for most of you, and maybe, like, I don't know how old, parents are not that, have to be older than that to have a kid in here. But when some groups of Muslims started engaging in terrorist activity, it kind of came center stage again. And now we hear a lot about Islam. Sometimes, I will throw this in too because we have time, sometimes you hear they talk about Shiite Muslims and Sunni Muslims, and it's kind of a complicated story, but what it amounts to is there are two groups. Some of them think that a certain relative of Muhammad should have taken over and become caliph. Some of them follow one leader after Muhammad. Some of them follow another leader after Muhammad. There are other differences as well, but they branched apart. Yes, do you want to add?
So does that have something to do with a difference between Turk and Arab?
No, I think most of the Turks are one or the other, and I don't remember which one. The Turks are a group of people that came even from the east of Persia and took over. They basically engulfed previously Muslim lands. Trying to think what years, 900, 1000, 1100, something like that. So after Islam had been established, this new wave of invaders, sort of like all these waves of Germanic tribes and the Huns and all these people that came from the east. Another group of people came, and they were the Turks, and they were very the Muslims at the time this happened were very much like our Arabian Nights Muslims. You see? Life's pretty chill. You know what I mean? It's like pretty cool. We don't really ever hear in the Arabian Nights about going to war, going to battle. I don't think there's a single, not in this particular collection anyway. There's not, we're going off and fighting for Allah. It's more, we're lounging around because life is good. And, the caliph, who's the head of the church, he lives in luxury in Baghdad. But this other group came in, the Turks, and they were just hardcore, tough. And they just gobbled them up. And the Muslim world became Turkish then. So let's talk about these stories. I noticed that this was what you read last week. This is the story of the second calendar. Okay, the calendars. By the way, I hope you understood they're not like pieces of paper with January, February, and March written on them. They are holy men. Okay, sort of like a monk. He says, I was taught first to read and write and then to learn the Quran, which is the basis of our holy religion. So he's telling what his child was like. What was his child like? I learned the Quran. On page 106. This is the beginning of the Tales of Sinbad. And this he got mentioned in Dorothy Mills. In the times of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. And Dorothy Mills says, Baghdad has become perhaps the traditional Arab city for wealth and splendor. In the later 8th century, Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph of the Arabian Nights, made Baghdad famous for its wealth and marvelous splendor. So you see the overlap. This is where these stories come from this world, this Muslim world. Okay, so I asked you last week to think about a couple of things. One thing is, what kind of world do these stories happen in? Is it normal and predictable? Can you always tell what's going to happen next? What? Say again over there. Oh. What? How? But then what is it like? But tell me why it's not like that. Give me an example. Tell me something unexpected that happens, and it happens a lot. Yeah, Nathan. Okay, genies come out of bottles on a regular basis. Most of you, I think I asked you this week or last week. Hey guys, let's not have a conversation. How many of you are familiar with the movie Aladdin? The Disney movie Aladdin. Some of you are sort of familiar with Aladdin. Is a story we're going to read in here too, and it famously centers on a genie coming out of a lamp, right? So these creatures apparently inhabit the desert. They can be trapped in something. We read a story this week. I think it was this week's reading. The one that was trapped, and do you remember he was going to kill him as soon as he got out?
Aladdin is also in the Arabian Nights.
Yes, yes, Aladdin is one of the stories. So we have these creatures. They're not God. They're not angels. We don't know what they are. They, but apparently they cause trouble. Um, okay, I just thought of this. Maybe you guys know this, and maybe you don't. In Europe, especially in Ireland and traditional Celtic countries, there are other creatures that often cause trouble, and we don't know what they are. They're not really evil or good. They just do things. Do you know the creatures I'm thinking of?
Fairies?
Fairies. Fairies that will do things to you, apparently just to laugh at you, or can be very mean to you sometimes. Sometimes you watch out for them. The people in those countries, up until C.S. Lewis's childhood, C.S. Lewis was from Ireland, and he said, when I was a boy, they pointed out certain areas, and they said, "Yeah, don't go there at night. Fairies. The fairies will mess with you." So the Arabs aren't the only people with these weird creatures doing things to you. It's kind of interesting that different people have these troublemaking creatures. I don't know what else to say. That don't seem to be evil, but they don't seem to be good. They just seem to be there. The genies. What else unexpected seems to happen a lot in these stories?
Oh, wait, so up until like C.S. Lewis, was he like one of the 1900s?
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter, talking a lot about my children today, my daughter did a paper on fairies in Celtic countries in college. And there was a man who traveled around in the early 1900s interviewing people about their brushes with fairies. And he said, I grew up with these people. They're not wackos. They're normal, intelligent, informed people that told me of the things fairies did to mess with them. Why this isn't happening anymore, or maybe it is and people don't talk about it because anyway, that's a conversation for another time. I would love to discuss fairies with any of you, but I'm a fairy agnostic. I don't have enough information to really judge what's going on there. But yeah, until very recent times. So I mentioned this just to make these people sound a little less wacky, I guess. But anyway, what else is happening in these stories that's quite odd? Everybody's turning into something else. My favorite is the poor guy who got turned into a monkey. Do you remember the monkey man?
Oh yeah.
His handwriting was excellent because he went into the he went into the underground chamber where the princess was, but accidentally left his shoes. And the genie came after him and took him to a mountain and threw dust on him and said, "I'm going to turn you into a monkey." And and then he lives as a monkey for a while, but he's a really smart monkey, because he's inside. He's still a man, and his handwriting is so good that they take him before the prince of the realm because he's looking for a good copyist. He's looking for a secretary. Like, this monkey is awesome. Okay, we'll hire the monkey. And then his daughter comes in and says, I think that monkey is actually a man. He says, how did you know this? And she says something that I marked because I just wanted to talk about it a little bit because it was so funny. Oh, there it is. He says, "Well, can you help the monkey?" He's like, "Yeah, I can do that. I've learned. I have some magic skills. I've got skills." And he says, "My daughter," said the Sultan, "I really had no idea you were so clever." "Sire," replied the princess, "there are many out-of-the-way things it is well to know, but one should never boast of them." There are many out-of-the-way things, obscure things. It is as well to know, but one should never boast of them. I'm not going to ask you to respond to this. This is what they call a rhetorical question, meaning you can just think it in your head. Do you have an out of the way thing that you know, something not everybody knows you can do? And you just keep it to yourself. Like, can you juggle or write poetry or walk an excessive distance on your hands, or, do backflips. You don't have to share. But I wonder if many of us have an out of the way thing it is as well to know. You never know when it might come in handy. Anyway, her thing was I can turn monkey men back into men, which she did. Yes, I told you last week that I just am charmed by the way people walk into rooms and say, you should know that this dog is my brother. This cow is my wife. And the way they say it, just, the cow is my wife. This happens sometimes. Genies turn your wife into a cow. It's a bummer, but you live with it. But the most famous stories you read this week were the stories of Sinbad. Now, this takes us full circle. Did something happen to Sinbad that was very much like something that happened to Brendan and his crew? Fish or turtle. Sea creature. We'll make everybody happy by calling it a sea creature. This happened to Sinbad. They got out of the ship onto the back of a sea creature, thinking it was an island. Does this strike anyone as odd that these people in Ireland in the 500s, 600s, and people in Baghdad in the Far East have the same story?
Not
I
really.
guess like they
Because his crew always dies the first 5 seconds of the end.
You know what? His crew does die. You know what? If you ever get on a ship and a guy is named Sinbad, get another ship. This is bad news. But do you see how it's the same story from people far away? Okay, but the most amazing story that's like another story is his third voyage. On Sinbad's third voyage, and by the way, as a digression, why do we think Sinbad keeps doing it again and again? He seems to have an issue with not staying home. Does anybody have? Why does he not learn the lesson? Why do you think, Nathan?
Because he wants his adventure. He wants his friends to be like giants.
He wants adventure. Are there people that just aren't happy when things are peaceful and settled and just normal life? And they just want thrills? Do you think, how many of you, okay, this is not a rhetorical question. How many of you ride roller coasters? Like if there's a roller coaster, you will get on it. Okay, I would rather pay a huge sum of money than be made to get on a roller coaster. I do not want any excitement in my life. You know what I mean? I just want it to be nice. And then I have children that just, yeah, how big is that roller coaster? Let's get on it. Maybe you're adopted. I don't know. Maybe they mixed you up in the hospital. You're not my child. I don't know. Some people like the thrill. What were you going to say, Zachary?
Well, what you were saying about Sinbad is just also
I went on a voyage and then I just stayed home and lived my life.
This is true. I went on a voyage and everything went perfectly well, and I sold all my stuff and I came home with boatloads of money, and then the end. That is a boring story. What do you think, Oren?
So Zach, Jonathan was talking about how his crew died. I saw this meme once, and it's like Odysseus. He was on a boat with his crew, and one of the crew asked, "What's an Odyssey?" And he's like, "The name of the only adventure named after the only person who survived." And the guy's just like, "Okay, yeah." Wait.
Yes. Which takes me to the third voyage of Sinbad. Here's the picture. You guys can see it. It is the huge guy with one eye in the middle of his forehead. Oh my goodness. And he does the same thing as he does in the Odyssey. He eats them. How do they get away?
And then he threw a rock there.
Yes. And how do they get away from him? Poke him in the eye. It's not exactly in every detail, but it's obviously the story of Odysseus on the island of the Cyclops. How did these Arab people, we're going to assume, okay, we have two choices. The Greeks made it up and the Arabs made it up and they didn't ever talk to each other. They made up the same story. This could happen. I can imagine horrible monsters that maybe someone else in the world has imagined. Option 2. One of them wrote the story about this creature with a big eye in the middle of his forehead, and we're going to poke the eye out and run away. And the other group of people heard the story. Do you think it's possible that the Arab people heard the story?
Or the Arabs wrote the story and the Greeks did it.
Except that the Greek one came a lot earlier.
I like some-
But Oren, you're thinking about it in the right way. Which came first? And I already told you that the Arabs were copying all sorts of Greek literature, their science. It seems obvious to me that they knew the story of the Odyssey. And Sinbad is really a lot like Odysseus. Except that,
Because he keeps being the only one to come back.
yes, except in Sinbad's case, like I said, he keeps coming home and then going out again. At least Odysseus didn't have much choice. You know, he kept getting thrown to this island and then on because all the gods were angry with him. But Sinbad just makes a choice to go out over and over. Okay, I see that it's time to let you go. Here's what I want you to read for next week. I want you to read chapter 5 of Dorothy Mills, or 4 if you want to. And in the Arabian Nights, if your book looks like mine, it is pages 180 to 260. This is Prince, oh man, Camaralzaman, all the way to Aladdin. Aladdin is in our reading. And here's what I'd like you to do before you leave me. As you read Aladdin, if you are familiar with the Disney version or another version, I want you to see the things that are the same. And I want you to see the things that got changed. The way the story, as we're given in this book, is different than the story you know. Are there any questions about anything? Well, no, not about anything. About the assignment or what we're doing. Don't ask me a question about anything. So, okay, great. I will see you next week. Have a great week.
Should I take a note part of it so I can just put it in whatever it's out?
Oh.